All right, well, welcome to our show. I'm actually very excited to be here with some personal friends and fellow music aficionados here today. And I'd like to introduce all of my guests. To my right, I have Pickles, a friend of mine, a music promoter in the DIY scene here in San Luis Obispo, also a comedian and a former KCPR DJ. Thanks so much for being with us, Pickles.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. And I will go to my left, Stephanie. Stephanie's a friend of mine, a big music fan, and somebody who's really involved in the slow record swap, which is kind of a local revival of the format of vinyl records.
Right.
So there you go. And Sean, what can you say about this gentleman? He's really involved in a lot of things. Sean right now is a KCBX public radio DJ, has a sound called a show called Citizen Sound, and you can tune into that. And also a musician, and what else can we say about you, Sean?
Studio owner.
Oh, there we go.
Former record store employee.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
There's a lot.
Very cool, very cool. Well, guys, in today's topic, this is on the topic of feels like the first time. Really focusing on the focus of our very first albums that we ever bought. And it may not be one singular album, it may be a multitude of albums, because sometimes it's hard to remember the exact first album that we purchased. But I'm going to get things going with my friend Pickles just to chat about this topic a little bit.
Well, the first album that I bought that I can think of was I was 13 and I was going into 8th grade, and I went to Cheap Thrills and went upstairs to the vinyl section, and I bought Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy, and The Who, Who's Next on vinyl.
Okay.
And I got to get that because I went to 8th grade registration at Laguna Middle School, and so I got to buy them.
They gave gift certificates for kids that were like good kids? Or
no,
what?
my aunt just said that I could buy them because I was well behaved at registration.
Okay.
And so those are the first albums that I bought.
You have a really cool aunt.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's very cool. Wow. So of those two albums, Pickle, have they both held up for you? Like, are those albums that you can still put down on the platter and listen to, or has your opinion of them changed over the years?
I still love them, but I get tons of shit for it because...
More so The Who than Zeppelin, or both of them?
I love both of them,
but
it's, like, not cool to like Led Zeppelin. It's just, like, I don't know, my generation doesn't think it's cool to be into it, but I'm like, I really loved them in middle school and in high school, and how can I not?
Great. Who's Next is such a great record.
Yeah, and Who's Next is a really great record. Like, that record is very much, like, still meaningful to me.
Yeah. Very cool, very cool. Well, that's really impressive. I think for most of us, our first records are ones that kind of fall into the guilty pleasure category. We might be a little embarrassed to admit that we got them. For me, actually, my first records weren't really records. I wasn't as cool as Pickles. My first albums were cassettes, and I was able to go back into the vaults and find what I believe are the first couple albums I ever purchased. And like Pickles, we do have a local music store called Cheap Thrills here in San Luis Obispo, along with probably the most renowned one being Boo Boo Records that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But back in the day, I think they still do this at Cheap Thrills, where they put the little tag on there.
Write the date.
And this was, I brought this cassette to school, so I remember I wrote my name on it so nobody would jack my cassette. But this was one of the classics. Rest in peace, Prince, Purple Rain. And the date on that was, if I can see it, 1984. So I was about 10 years old there. That was one of my first ones. This one is from June of '84, before I turned 10. Personal favorite, Billy Idol, Rebel Yell. I still like Billy. Saw him a couple years ago. Pretty cool. And then another from about the same time, June of '84, so it might have been part of my birthday thing was the break-in soundtrack. I was a big breakdancing guy. Had the pleasure of interviewing Turbo, Michael Chambers, a couple years ago, the guy that, in his words, had taught Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk. So that was very cool. So I think those are mine, and I'm sticking to them. I like all of these, actually. I still listen to them, and especially Purple Rain, one of my favorites. And those of us who were here in San Luis Obispo a couple months ago had the pleasure of having kind of a memorial event in honor of Prince when he passed, and that was kind of a special event. So, any questions or comments? Thumbs up on those? No arguments on
these?
love
the breaking.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
The trifecta of these 3 cassettes? Okay.
It's so great.
Just you need the rad soundtrack and the
Chris
thrashing,
Slater.
so you
Yeah.
can have the skateboarding and the
It's actually,
bicycling and the breakdancing. And
True,
it could
true.
be, like, the circle
Amazing
could be complete.
the actually resurgence of a lot of that sound.
Yeah.
And there's a movie called The Turbo Kid right now.
Okay.
That the whole soundtrack is that era.
Oh, wow. Okay.
80s stuff. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, the soundtrack to Strange Things, too.
Yeah.
Stranger Things,
Yeah, yeah.
that very synth-heavy, and there's a big resurgence on that.
It's great.
Well, what about you, my friend? Steph, first albums that you bought?
Well, I've always been a big Prince fan, and
Yeah.
so I would say my first cassette, one of my first cassettes, was Around the World in a Day. Then it followed, I got some of the ones previous, 1999,
Yeah.
and then Sign of the Times.
Yeah. Oh.
It's hard to remember exactly which one it was
Yeah.
first, but as I hit junior high, my tastes got a little less sophisticated, and I had the Debbie Gibson
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
cassette, Tiffany,
Tiffany.
and
Electric Youth.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Electric
New Kids on the Block and Weird Al, of course.
Weird Al, all
Yeah.
right.
And
Okay.
so those were my.
Weird Al holds
yeah.
up, man.
He does.
Yeah.
He just released, just yesterday, he
know.
dropped a new music video, like the day after the debates.
Yeah.
He was already riffing on the debates, and we had the pleasure of interviewing Al, a former KCPR DJ, for a project that will be unveiled here very soon. Well, Steph, talking about Prince, I mean, when he passed, one of the things, a lot of things came up in talking to people. Prince meant a lot of things to a lot of different people. To females, often there was a
Right.
slightly different,
Right.
take on Prince than us guys, but we all agree that, especially back in the day, I mean, there was nobody, to me, he was my generation's king of pop. Forget Michael, no offense,
Yeah, I
but
agree.
Prince was my guy. Prince was also a guy that sort of introduced me to a lot of, how shall we say,
Sexuality.
sexual themes
Yeah.
that my young mind at the age of 9 was not necessarily privy to.
Right.
And so I still remember the days of popping in that cassette player, being outside, listening to it. I had a boombox, and on comes Darling
I was
Nikki.
just gonna say.
And, and then the whole thing, masturbating with a magazine, and,
Lady Cab Driver, too, on 1999 was
Okay.
really intense.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So for you, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know about all y'all, at least for those of us, who grew up like really in the 80s. Did Prince sort of like open your world to, or were you already aware of stuff? Was that just like, that's just, there's nothing new about what he's chatting about there? Because for me, it was all new, and I had to ask my grandparents, like, what does masturbating mean?
No.
It's like, that thing I do in the bedroom every day. Oh, okay, it's not that big of a deal, but it sounded a lot more sexy when Prince was talking about it, you know what I mean?
I would definitely say it was sexy. My dad was a Jimmy Buffett fan, so I grew up with Why Don't We Get Drunk and Screw at a
Okay.
really young age, and that was
Okay.
kind of the introduction.
That was your
What is
Birds
he
and the
talking
Bees.
about?
Yeah. Screw.
But definitely it was interesting because I think I was introduced to Prince on the 1999 album
Yeah.
Little Red Corvette,
Yeah.
and that was an erotic song.
Yeah.
And sound and theme, and then the way it was performed, and the little interlude, in there, and then when Purple Rain came out and the single and the video because MTV, was such a huge influence
Definitely.
on 80s generation, and him crawling across the floor, and it's like,
Was that the bearskin rug shot?
yeah,
okay.
and I'm just like,
The steam.
I think at that age I didn't really get that yet, because I wasn't a sexual at that point, but I was just like, what is he doing? It's just weird, man. I don't get it.
And as a young boy,
Yeah.
it's like, is this, cool to like
Yeah,
this?
exactly.
Or is it like
Yeah.
you
And,
know,
it was weird. It was
gender
'cause
bending a little bit?
that-
I mean, Prince was. He was a very pretty guy.
Yeah.
Thin, svelte. I mean, so it was definitely a elegance to
It was
his-
a weird juxtaposition because I really loved the 1999 album, and then when
Yeah.
Purple Rain came out and when Doves Cry was the first single off of that,
Yeah.
I hated it. I hated when Doves Cry.
Okay.
Hated it so much.
Because of the video? Was that how you
no, I
were
just didn't get it. I didn't
Okay.
get the. I didn't get it. It's a, you know, he's a genius at a genius level of creating music and still having his sound in a popular format. So it had interesting sounds. It was an interesting setup. The rhythm was interesting, and it just didn't follow the regular norms of pop.
verse,
right?
chorus, verse.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And so I was just like, it wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that particular album didn't hit me until I was probably 17. So years after, you know, three years after that record came out is when I started going back and I still would not play that song. So, you know, you could program your CD player
Okay, yeah.
and I'd put that
Skipped
in
it,
and
yeah.
I'd always skip when
Yeah.
Doves Cry, but every other song on the album was just like, oh, it's the best, you know.
Wow, wow. Well, Sean, you know, Sean's talking about kind of his relationship with Prince. I mean, for you, I think we talked one time and you told me a little secret that you performed a Prince song at a school. You got to get a
I
photo of
did,
this.
yeah.
A
My
school,
nickname was Prince in 6th grade at
yeah.
the talent show.
Tell us a little about that.
that.
For the record.
Well,
Is
it
there
was,
pictures? Is
it
there
was
pictures?
off the You Got the Look off the Sign of the Times
Okay,
album,
classic.
and there was a talent show, and my girlfriends were doing a dance to Belinda Carlisle, I think.
Heaven on
is,
Earth?
Yeah, Heaven
Or
is a
whatever.
Place on Earth, or something similar to that. One of those big hits, and I didn't want to be part of that group. I didn't feel it, and I thought, you know, I want to do some kind of an artistic dance, you know, some kind of a expression,
I'm a Sheena
you know,
Easton person,
expression.
not a
Yeah,
Belinda Carlisle
exactly. Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And
So how did you
didn't
pull
have
it
very
off,
many
Steph?
friends in school, so I kind of related to Prince and how he was
Yeah.
artistic and different. And
So it was kind of
and-
punk rock. It was kind of
Yeah.
the anti thing to do to represent Prince at that time. So
right, so I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any training in dance, but I got up there in a leotard and I started down and I rose up and I did.
did you
a
have like a
dance,
purple
You Got
rose
the
in your
Look.
mouth or
No.
something? Oh, okay.
So it was
But
all interpretive.
Prior to that dance, which is on film somewhere, it was
Yeah.
awful. Well, first they messed it up, so instead of playing Prince, they just started it off with "Ooh, baby, do you know what that's?" And it totally
It's hard to
ruined-
transition
Yeah,
from that into the
it
yeah.
ruined the intro
Sure.
completely, and it threw me off, I guess.
Okay.
But prior to that, I used to dress up like Prince and lip sync for my family.
All
That's
right.
Yeah.
awesome.
That's a cool thing for a
Yeah,
resume.
so I know a lot of Prince lyrics
All
by
right,
heart.
All right. Well, that qualifies you for
Yeah.
being on the show. Very cool. Well, Sean, we talked about Prince. Transitioning over to you, man. First albums.
Well, the first albums were actually 45s.
Okay.
And I think I can still remember them all. It was Tom Petty, The Waiting. It was George Harrison all those years ago. Gary U.S. Bonds with This Little Girl.
Okay.
I think there was two more. Might have been a Pretenders 45 in there. Those were the first I remember going into a record store and purposely buying.
Okay.
Back in the day, when I'd go to school, I would leave I'd have a cassette and I would record the radio station, and it was 93.3. That was classic rock at that time, and I guess they still are. And I'd come home, I was just going to be so excited to hear what I captured.
Yeah.
And those were the songs that I was like, oh, I love this, and it inspired me to go down to Cheap Thrills when it was above Corb's Trading Post, and dug through the bins and found those 45s, and those were my first recollection of buying music, purposely going to a music store. The first full album I ever bought was AC/DC Dirty Deeds done dirt cheap.
Okay.
Bought it at Tower Records up in Sacramento on a Christmas. It was like I had gotten like $10 or something,
Okay.
and it's like, oh, I'm gonna go buy this cassette at Tower Records.
Nice. That was pretty badass. AC/DC.
Yeah,
As a
I-
young guy.
Well, I was given, my family, I've always been surrounded by music, so
Sounds like
I didn't, there was no lack. So, I had pretty young parents, and then their siblings, they were both the oldest of their siblings. So coming down the lines of their brothers and sisters, they always had hit music. So I didn't have a need. It's like, oh, hey, Kiss Destroyer came out. Oh, my uncle bought it.
Wow.
You know, he already had it. So I was just constantly listening to it.
And that's an interesting topic. I mean, I think Sean was at an advantage, some privilege there that some of us maybe weren't. I know I wasn't in that, you know, I had really nice parental figures, a lot better than a lot of my friends who grew in like really rigid Christian households. I had a really good friend, rest in peace, named Noah, who I remember going over to his house, and he had Hall & Oates records. And his dad, who was a very fundamentalist Christian, I believe, thought Hall & Oates was satanic. And I remember one time I went over to his house, and all of his precious Hall & Oates records were broken by his dad, because his dad was saying, I don't remember what it was, absolutely ridiculous. And really sad when a kid has an influence that isn't cultivated by one's parents.
Sure.
I know, Pickles, you mentioned your aunt and her being a really supportive figure, but in going out and buying music and bringing it home and listening to it, was there a taboo to some of it? I mean, was it like, oh, I better listen to this in private because my parents or guardians might not think it's acceptable, or what was that like for you?
Well, I grew up with my grandpa and my aunt, and they raised me. And my grandpa, he like gave me a ton of records,
Okay.
and he like fostered my love of music.
Okay.
And my aunt hates music.
Okay.
My aunt just like hates all the music that I listen to.
Okay.
But she just tolerated it, and I would listen.
Oh, that's cool.
I would listen to my music in my room on my record player,
Okay.
and she would like tell me to turn it down sometimes,
Okay.
and that's about it.
You were lucky then, yeah. It
Yeah.
sounds like your aunt was a very, you know, not a lot of stigma or secrecy.
Sure.
You know, I think a lot of my friends that grew up in really, again, not to diss religion, but really fundamentalist Christian households had a little bit more of that, where they were really into something, but it was a big secret, and they had to keep it secret. And the secrecy of it somehow spawned a love of death metal or gangster rap, because there was like this repression factor that empowered the desire, the orientation towards the music.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it drives people towards it. You know, it's like, what's the thing that I can do that can piss off my parents the
There's
most?
that element.
You know, would just absolutely throttle them. It's like, well, this new Slayer record. Okay, I'm gonna play that relentlessly for the next year.
Yeah. or Two Life Crew.
Yeah, you know,
something
exactly.
like that,
You know,
I feel like I was like that, even though I didn't have like parental figures that told me that this is the devil's music. I mean, I love weird music, but also I love weirding out my aunt. I always have.
Yeah.
And so she'd be like, I would listen to Pink Floyd's The Wall, and she'd be like, what is this? Like, this is scary music.
Yeah.
And then I got, like, more into, like, crazy music, where I'm, like, listening to Diamanda Gallis, and my aunt's like, what is this?
Yeah.
Or, like, Yoko Ono, or, like, Melt Banana, like, just, like, what can I find that's the most screamy?
Yeah.
And my aunt being very terrified, like, why is there screaming coming out of your mouth?
Yeah, and I remember, you know, the Pickles Variety Hour and all the great things you did on KCPR, you know, really such a diverse, for your age especially at the time, you know, being in your early 20s, I was like, wow, this gal knows her music from various eras. I've always been impressed by your music knowledge and interest. That's really interesting about your aunt in the sense that, like, I think there's something, even if you didn't have parents that were repressive, there's something a little rebellious about rock and roll.
Oh, of course.
You know, and especially when you're in your adolescence. I wanted to ask you guys, kind of on this topic too, I don't think we mentioned it, I did, but I was about 9, 10-ish when I really came into music hard. What were your guys' respective ages? You may have mentioned it, but there's something really formative about those, whether it's, you know, from age 8 to 12 or somewhere around adolescence, pre-puberty, that seems like a lot of us, our brains just are like sponges, and there's a lot of formative stuff going on. What was the age that you mentioned? Or junior high, right?
I was in 7th grade when I got into music, because when I went to Hawthorne Elementary School right over here, and then when I went into middle school, I went into Laguna, and it was this big experience of all the elementary schools coming together, and that was a big deal because there's only one middle school, so everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, there's going to be like so many kids and all these different kids. And so because of that, I got exposed to all these like different kids that came from different backgrounds, and everybody was into music and all different kinds of music. And I had like...
So did you feel a little insecure about that? Like you had to catch up to those kids because they were...
I just felt feral. I felt just like I didn't know anything, and I got thrown into this, and there were all these kids that were like talking about Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, the Sex Pistols, and the Germs, and Circle Jerks, and PIL, and I was like, I don't know what any, like, I don't know these things, and so I went out to go and find music, and I just like bought up a bunch of stuff, and I was about 12 or 13, and so I started listening to all this music all of a sudden, and I remember my favorite band became the Ramones when I was in 7th grade. I bought a Ramones shirt from the Sub. I started wearing a giant jacket with a bunch of pins and patches.
I could see it.
And I went like full force into it.
Yeah.
I love that you had an open mind enough to take all that in too, because like you said, there's so much coming at you, you know, with that all those new resources. People, oh, you should check this out, check that out, and a lot of people can get overwhelmed, or they'll listen to one and then be just so turned off by it that they just won't explore anymore, especially at that age too.
Well, we were talking before camera too. A good point, Sean. That for a lot of us at a certain age, we may have been around a social cohort of kids at school, and that were into certain bands, and they would talk about, for me it was the Beastie Boys. Everybody in junior high was all about Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique, and all the people that were into Beastie Boys were total jerks. Jock, kind of guys that would beat nerds up in the shower, and so to me Beastie Boys was like jock music. It was like big hair, intolerant, homophobic kind of music. That's how I interpreted it. So I really didn't like Beastie Boys for a long time, simply because of the people that were carrying that torch.
Sure.
Now that's not fair to the band, and I later went on to really appreciate the band. But for you, Pickles, that cohort of being at school with certain kids that maybe they weren't even friends of yours, like kids that you didn't really like, or they were saying, oh, this band's really cool, but you're like, that band may be cool, but you suck, therefore the band must suck. Did you have any of that, kind of where certain bands you got turned off just because of the association or the bias of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All the bands that I like came from like the punk kids, and that's where I started hanging out. I was a punk kid, and I hung out with them. And our rivals were the preppies.
Sure.
And we didn't like them or their music. And
what kind of music were they repping?
I remember the big songs. It was 2003, 2004.
Coldplay?
No, that Coldplay was popular when I was in elementary school. What was popular was Toxic by Britney Spears.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
There was This Love by Maroon 5.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
Some pop hits.
Time of My Life by Jason Mraz. And I remember for a long time I didn't like Ludacris. Now I like Ludacris, but for a long time I didn't, because total assholes loved that song Stand Up by Ludacris that year. And I didn't like Outkast for a long time, and now I do.
Because you had a bunch of people singing Sorry Miss Jackson, and you're like,
Hey
that's
Ya,
lame.
and all these
sure.
and all those people sucked.
Yeah.
I just remember the big radio station was Sly 96.
Sure.
And every Thursday we had to go to the weight room for PE. And I had like first period PE, so it was like in the morning, and I'm like not there yet, and we have to like go into this all these kids in this stupid weight room together, and there was a boom box, and we would fight over who wants what. Like everybody that was a preppy wanted Sly 96, and I would have to like bear like listening to Toxic, and I was like so mad about it. And then like
it's an interesting picture of Pickles in the weight room.
I was like on an elliptical, and then me and my friends would
beads of hate sweat dripping down your face. Yeah, okay.
And me and my friends would hijack the boombox and put on 93.3 KCOZ, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna listen to like Van Halen. Fuck you.
Okay.
But there's also a disdain, I mean, there's like in groups like that as well, where it's like those people just don't get it. They're not like digging in the music. They don't understand how empty a lot of this music is, you know? They just want to listen to it, and I have a disdain because they're not exploring it better. There's more important music than what you're listening to, and it's a symptom of who you are.
Sort of, a lot of it. There's a social relativity, for better or worse. It's not necessarily fair to the musicians, but it does exist in how a lot of us, especially pre-internet, discovered music.
Oh, sure.
And we're getting towards the end of the show, but Steph, I wanted to kind of bring that up for you. You mentioned the Prince, Britney Spears, not Britney's, Tiffany and Debbie Gibson contingencies. For you, were there, when you were coming into the fold in terms of music appreciation, were there certain bands that other people really liked that at the time you just didn't like because, bullies or jocks or whoever were into them, but maybe you went on to appreciate those artists a little bit, or like do you appreciate Debbie Gibson now? I guess is what I'm saying.
Deborah, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I still do listen to Debbie Gibson and Tiffany, and I still like them.
Okay.
So I will defend them. But yeah, I think growing up, the bands that people in my high school listened to were more like Garth Brooks and House of Pain. I mean, there was even a group of people that were listening to Nirvana, and at the time, it was the whole grunge movement. It was all Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana. I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
I didn't, specifically Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
Could not stand it.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was going and I was getting into the new wave. Gary Newman,
So you were reactionary to that
yeah,
scene
exactly.
a little bit.
And I thought,
Yeah,
this is just too mainstream.
Okay.
And, they had The Real World on MTV, and they were
yeah.
promoting Nirvana, and it was just,
Yeah.
I thought it was a big joke,
Yeah.
And so, I just kind of pushed back on grunge, and now there's some grunge that I like, but yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, following what Stephanie just said, that theme of bands that other friends, or not friends, but people maybe you didn't like in your formative years that liked a certain band, that just because of that association, you did not like them at that time.
I would probably be on the receiving end of the Beastie Boys part, because it was the License Still album came out at the perfect time for me to be that asshole. I was 16 years old, and my best friend had a Jeep that we had fixed up, and it was was raised. And
You got a booming Jeep with the bass in the back?
Yep,
all right.
And it was the perfect soundtrack to our obnoxious teen years.
Yeah.
So anything that we could get away with to do that, we did. I have a funny story about music that people like that I didn't like necessarily, and I'll never live it down because my best friend brings it up almost every time I see him. I got the unique advantage of growing up in California and moving to Georgia in the middle of my teens, and seeing the juxtaposition between how cool California is and how not cool where I moved was.
And it wasn't Athens, Georgia. It wasn't like
No,
REM,
I did.
B-52
I mean,
scene,
I did get to go up there, but no. So, anyways, I was a big pop hair metal fan. I just liked it. I was a musician. I liked guitar playing and fanciness. Blah 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 blah. So I liked the melodic kind of metal stuff. Yeah. And then when Metallica hit really hard, I hated them. And everybody's like, they're so great. They're great. It's like, Metallica sucks. They're the worst band.
And this is probably the And Justice for All era. Not
this
necessarily
was
Ride
Master.
the Lightning.
No, this was Master of Puppets.
Oh, okay, earlier stuff.
Right after Ride the Lightning, and it took me, and I'll never live it down because I really like those albums now.
Yeah.
But I dug my heels in.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, I don't like them now. I don't like them. I'm not gonna budge.
Yeah, and if you suddenly started listening to them, you'd probably be called out by your friends.
I do. I get called out all the time.
Or back then you would have too.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of maintain that hatred for a while.
Yeah, I did.
Got out of high school, and then you could listen to them a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys. Well, I think we're coming up to the tail end of this show. I want to thank my friends here, Pickles, Stephanie, and Sean, for being on the show.
Thank you.
And I want to mention, too, we've got a lot of exciting things coming up, a lot more episodes in store for y'all. So definitely want to encourage folks to check out the website, inneredgemusic.com, and stay connected with us on social media. Let us know your comments. If you have any ideas for future shows, there's so much territory that me and my friends and other friends that are going to be on the show are going to want to explore that I think there's no lack of places to go with this. Places to go and people to see. So again, I want to thank everybody for watching, and until next time, keep on spinning.